There comes a point in life when growth isn't about adding more. It's about quietly removing what has been weighing you down for years. Not announcing it, not explaining it, not proving anything to anyone. Because some of the most powerful changes happen in complete silence. Psychology suggests that many of the things keeping us anxious, exhausted, or emotionally stuck aren't obvious. They're invisible habits, expectations, and emotional burdens we've carried for so long that they've started to feel like part of who we are. But they aren't, and once you recognize them, you may never carry them the same way again. Today, we're exploring 10 things you should secretly let go of. No dramatic goodbye, no social media announcement, no need for anyone else's approval. Just quiet freedom. Let's begin. The first thing you should quietly let go of is the need to explain yourself. Many people spend years trying to make everyone understand them. Why they made that decision, why they left, why they changed, why they said no. It feels responsible. It feels polite. But psychologically, this often comes from something much deeper than kindness. It comes from a fear of being misunderstood. The truth is, people who constantly explain themselves are often trying to control how others perceive them. But perception is something you'll never fully control. Some people will misunderstand you no matter how carefully you explain. Some already decided who you are before you even opened your mouth. The healthiest people eventually discover something surprising. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Sometimes peace begins the moment you stop defending your existence. Next, quietly let go of old versions of yourself. People often stay loyal to identities they've already outgrown. The funny one, the people pleaser, the responsible child, the person who never says no. These identities may have protected you once, but protection can quietly become a prison. Psychologists call this identity attachment. Your brain prefers familiarity, even when familiarity hurts. That's why change often feels uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, but because your mind mistakes the familiar for the safe. Real growth begins when you allow yourself to become someone your past wouldn't recognize, quietly, without asking permission. Another burden worth releasing is the need to win every argument. Have you ever noticed that some of the wisest people don't argue very much? It's not because they can't. It's because they've learned something incredibly valuable. Winning an argument rarely changes a person's heart. In psychology, this is related to what's known as confirmation bias. People naturally defend beliefs they've already invested in. The harder you push, the harder they resist. Sometimes silence is not surrender. It's emotional intelligence. You don't have to attend every battle you're invited to. Your peace is worth more than your ego. Then there's the exhausting need to be liked by everyone. This one silently controls millions of lives. Before speaking, they wonder, will they approve? Before posting, what will people think? Before making decisions, will someone be disappointed? Over time, your life slowly becomes a performance instead of an experience. The irony is that the more desperately you chase universal approval, the less authentic you become. Psychology consistently shows that people who develop a stable internal sense of worth rely less on external validation, not because they don't care about others, but because they stopped letting strangers decide their value. You don't need everyone to understand you. You'll need to stop abandoning yourself. Another thing to quietly release is the guilt for outgrowing people. One of the hardest truths in adulthood is that not everyone is meant to stay. Some friendships belong to a different season. Some conversations no longer fit who you're becoming. Some relationships survive only because both people refuse to change. Growth creates distance, not because anyone became bad, but because direction matters. Many people carry enormous guilt for evolving. They shrink themselves just to keep old relationships comfortable. But psychology reminds us that healthy development naturally changes social circles. You aren't betraying people by becoming healthier. You're simply refusing to betray yourself. By this point, you may notice that none of these things are physical. They are invisible weights, ways of thinking, quiet fears, expectations that slowly shape every decision you make without you even realizing it. And the deeper we go, the more personal these burdens become. The next 5 are often the hardest to let go because they don't just influence your life, they quietly become part of your identity. Sometimes the hardest thing to release isn't a person, it isn't a habit. It's the hope that every story will eventually make sense. Many people spend years waiting for closure. They believe one final conversation, one sincere apology, or one honest explanation will finally allow them to move on. But real life rarely works that way. Sometimes people disappear without warning. Sometimes friendships slowly fade until there's nothing left to save. Sometimes the people who hurt you never admit they were wrong. And sometimes they don't even remember the moment that changed your life forever. Psychology suggests that waiting for closure from someone else quietly gives them control over your peace. Your healing becomes dependent on their choices instead of your own. The longer you wait for someone else to finish your story, the longer you remain emotionally attached to a chapter that has already ended. Think about how much energy that takes. Replaying conversations in your mind, imagining what you should have said, wondering whether they'll ever understand how much they hurt you. It slowly drains your emotional life without changing the past. At some point, you have to accept a difficult truth. Not every question will be answered, not every ending will feel fair, and not every wound will receive the apology it deserves. Sometimes closure is not something you're given, it's something you choose. It's the quiet decision to stop waiting for permission to heal. Another burden many people carry without realizing it is comparing their timeline to everyone else's. Every day you're surrounded by carefully edited moments from other people's lives. Someone gets promoted, someone buys a new house, someone gets married, someone travels the world. Someone seems happier, healthier, more successful, and more confident than you. Without even noticing, your brain starts measuring your entire life against tiny snapshots of theirs. Psychologists call this social comparison, and it's one of the fastest ways to destroy gratitude. The problem isn't comparison itself. Human beings naturally compare. The problem is forgetting that you're comparing your ordinary Tuesday afternoon to someone else's greatest highlight. You see their victories, but not their fears, their celebrations, but not their sleepless nights, their smiles, but not the private battles they never share. Everyone's journey unfolds at a different pace because everyone begins from a different place, different families, different opportunities, different struggles, different emotional wounds, different dreams. There is no universal schedule for becoming the person you're meant to become. A tree never apologizes for growing slower than a flower. The ocean never envies the mountains. Nature doesn't compete with itself, and perhaps we were never meant to either. Your only meaningful comparison is with the person you were yesterday. If you've become a little wiser, a little kinder, a little calmer, then you're already moving in the right direction. One of the heaviest burdens people secretly carry is the belief that they must control everything. Many confuse control with safety. They plan every detail. They rehearse every conversation before it happens. They imagine every possible disaster, believing that if they think hard enough, they can somehow prevent pain. But what often looks like preparation is actually anxiety wearing a disguise. Psychology refers to this as the illusion of control. The mind convinces itself that enough worrying will somehow protect us from uncertainty. Yet uncertainty is part of being alive. No amount of planning can eliminate every disappointment, every goodbye, every unexpected change. The more tightly you try to control life, the more fragile life begins to feel. Imagine holding water in your hands. If you squeeze too tightly, most of it slips away. Peace doesn't come from controlling every outcome. It comes from trusting yourself to handle whatever outcome arrives. That is resilience. And resilience is far more powerful than certainty. Then there is a burden that many strong people carry in complete silence, believing they must carry every emotional weight alone. These are the people everyone depends on: the reliable friend, the responsible sibling, the calm coworker, the one who always says, "I'll figure it out." Somewhere in their past, they learned that asking for help wasn't an option. Maybe they grew up too fast. Maybe they became the caretaker in their family. Maybe they discovered early that vulnerability was ignored or punished, so they adapted. They became independent, resourceful, capable. Everyone admires their strength, but almost no one notices how tired they are. They become everyone's safe place while secretly having nowhere safe to rest themselves. They remember everyone's birthdays. They answer late-night phone calls. They solve problems that aren't even theirs. Slowly, they begin believing that their worth depends on how much they can carry. But psychology reminds us that emotional suppression isn't strength, it's accumulated weight. Human beings were never designed to survive entirely alone. Our nervous systems heal through trust, connection, and being understood. Real strength isn't pretending nothing hurts. Real strength is knowing when to put the weight down. Sometimes the bravest words a person can say are simply, "I need help." Not because they're weak, but because they've finally stopped confusing suffering with strength. And finally, perhaps the greatest burden of all is the person you believe you have to become. Many people spend their entire lives chasing an imaginary version of themselves: the perfect parent, the perfect partner, the perfect employee, the perfect success story. They tell themselves they'll finally be happy when they lose the weight, earn more money, find the perfect relationship, fix every flaw, or achieve one more goal. But every time they arrive, the finish line quietly moves again. Psychologists describe this as the hedonic treadmill. We quickly adapt to success, and yesterday's dream becomes today's expectation. Satisfaction keeps moving into the future, while the present is never enough. The tragedy isn't that perfection is impossible. The tragedy is missing your real life while chasing it. You become your own harshest critic. You dismiss your progress because someone else seems further ahead. You forget to appreciate the person you've already become. Imagine meeting the younger version of yourself today, the child who once worried about the future. Would they really judge you for not being perfect, or would they simply be amazed that you survived everything they were afraid of? Perhaps you've been far stronger than you've ever given yourself credit for. Psychology consistently shows that lasting well-being isn't built on perfection. It's built on self-acceptance. You can continue growing without constantly rejecting who you already are. Those two ideas are not enemies. They belong together. Maybe the life you've been searching for doesn't begin when you become someone new. Maybe it begins when you quietly stop pretending to be someone else. These 10 things were never objects you could throw away overnight. They were invisible burdens, old beliefs, expectations, fears, silent habits that quietly shaped the way you lived. The beautiful thing is that once you recognize them, they begin to lose their power. Freedom isn't always about gaining more. Sometimes it's simply about carrying less. You don't need to announce your growth. You don't need applause. You don't need permission. Some of the greatest transformations happen so quietly that the world never notices. But you do. One day you wake up feeling lighter, calmer, and more present than you have in years. Not because your life suddenly became easier, but because you finally stopped carrying things that were never yours to hold. So ask yourself one simple question. Which of these invisible burdens are you finally ready to let go of? Sometimes naming the weight is the first step toward putting it down, and perhaps that's where your quiet transformation begins.